Hello, I'm Anna Endresen, and this is the talk entitled Prohibitive Constructions in Russian, Families and Clusters. The talk will be presented at the 11th International Conference on Construction Grammar on the 18th August 2021. Here you can see the 5 co-authors of this study, and Valentina and Daria will also present parts of this talk. So one of the key ideas of construction grammar is the idea that constructions in a language comprise not an unordered list, but rather a structured inventory termed constructicon or repertory or network or set of networks. These are all comparable terms that capture the major idea that there is some sort of structure in a constructicon, that there are systemic relationships that link constructions to each other. In the book on constructicography published in 2018, in the introduction, Benjamin Lungfeld wrote that most work in construction grammar consists of case studies of individual constructions or small groups of constructions. And the overall structure of the constructicon as such is largely left unexplored. Well, it seems that the situation is gradually changing and more studies explore how large groups of constructions are organized. In particular, my colleagues and I work towards filling this gap while building a constructicon for Russian. We have specifically addressed several large networks of constructions like assessment and attitude constructions and comparative constructions. And today we are going to present a study of a smaller set, 57 Russian constructions that express prohibition of an action. Our major point lies in the notions of family, cluster, and network, and we plan to demonstrate how we group constructions into families, how families form distinct clusters, and in the end, comprise a single network. So here is the plan for this talk. We will say a few words about the Russian Constructicon and the theoretical background of this study, then explain our approach and turn to the major part, the radial category model for our data. We will conclude with the notions, with our definitions of these 3 notions: family, cluster, and network of constructions. So this study is a part of a larger project called the Russian Constructicon, which is a free open access electronic resource that contains a searchable database of over 2,200 Russian grammatical constructions. In the resource, the constructions are accompanied with descriptions of their properties and corpus illustrations. This resource is designed for users of various kinds, including not only professional linguists working on Russian, but also students and teachers of Russian as a foreign language, also non-Slavists, typologists, and specialists in natural language processing. The project has been administered over the past 5 years, and you can hear more about this also in the upcoming talk at this conference on Friday. The Russian Constructicon has a user-friendly interface that looks like this, and you can access it via this link and browse through the constructions or set a more advanced search using a variety of filters. Just to give you a flavor of how constructions are represented here, let us have a look at the prohibitive constructions. Construction "Хорош прыгать," meaning stop xing. It has a short morphosyntactic formula and recognizable illustration. Эй, наверху, хорош прыгать. Hey, upstairs. Hey, up there, stop jumping. We provide definitions in 3 languages: Russian, English, and Norwegian, and also 5 examples based on authentic sentences from the Russian National Corpus. This construction is a good example of our data because it has both a fixed lexical element, the anchor "хорош," which is a frozen short predicative form of the adjective "хороший," meaning good, and an open slot, the verb phrase that has certain restrictions on its fillers. We specify most common fillers of the slot and also provide some more additional information like semantic and syntactic type of construction, syntactic function and structure of the anchor, as well as universal dependencies analysis of the syntax, usage label, comments, and also references to existing scholarly descriptions. All constructions in our Constructicon are classified into 55 semantic types that we group in 5 large classes. Prohibition is one of these semantic types, and it belongs to the class modality and its neighborhood, the subclass neighborhood. In our approach, we follow Adele Goldberg's analysis of the family of English constructions that exhibit subject auxiliary inversion, and also Goldberg and Jackendoff's earlier analysis of the English resolutive constructions, where they bring up the idea of family resemblance both in syntax and semantics. And now Valentina will tell us more about the notion of the family.
Well, it is hard to find a clear definition of what a family of constructions is. We find that there exist different approaches to the very notion of a constructional family. One type of approaches focuses on inheritance relationships between constructions, when one or more specific constructions instantiate a more abstract one and inherit its properties. Here, the family metaphor is used in the terms parent and child construction. Since the focus is on parent versus children, we can call this a nuclear family. A subtype of this would be a family of constructions with multiple inheritance links, for example, with 2 parents. In the Russian Constructicon, we sometimes have both parent and child constructions as distinct entries when one of specific lexical instantiations of a more general schema becomes very entrenched, very highly frequent. Then we represent it as a separate entry. And normally such parent-child cases would be found within a single family. However, when we talk about families of constructions, we focus rather on horizontal relationships between 2 or more constructions that have certain properties in common. First of all, semantic properties, but also structural. Mostly, we combine the approaches 1 and 2, and have in mind extended families that can include a nuclear family, but usually extend beyond that to non-immediate relatives, like constructions that are aunts, uncles, and in-laws, and so on. To illustrate this point, let us look at one of the most interesting families of prohibitive constructions, which encodes not the standard prohibition spoken in a strict peremptory tone, but a milder, friendly tone, and can be interpreted as attenuated prohibition. Another semantic peculiarity of this family is that the speaker views the activity of the interlocutor as excessive or too long and suggests stopping this activity and moving on to something else. This family has 7 constructions that split in 2 subgroups according to their semantic and structural properties. On this slide, you can see the first subgroup. These 4 constructions contain measuring predicates. They measure the activity and denote enough. Morphologically, we see very different predicates. Довольно is more like an adverb, хватит is a verb, and хорош is a short form of an adjective. Note that we postulate no copular verb here. All of these predicates combine with the imperfective infinitive, whereas the 4th construction combines with a noun instead, and that noun denotes the activity. The interlocutor is optional or impossible to be overtly expressed in these constructions. By contrast, in the other subgroup of constructions that belong to the same family, the experiencer is overtly expressed, more or less obligatory. For example, будет тебе врать, enough telling lies, or полно тебе плакать, enough crying for you, you should move on, and ладно вам спорить, that is enough arguing for you. Overall, These three constructions convey more supportive attitude of the speaker towards the interlocutor, are spoken in a comforting, caring tone, and the activity that should be stopped is evaluated less negatively by the speaker. And if we try to capture the structure of this family, we end up with the following picture that you can see. The first group of constructions can be seen as instantiations of a single, more abstract schema, which is quantifying predicative plus infinitival imperfective verb phrase specifying the activity. And the second subgroup instantiates a subtype of this abstract schema with encoded experiencer. The inheritance links from the schema can be postulated also for the two constructions of the first group, where the experiencer is possible to code, but it's not obligatory. The predicates in these constructions are grammaticalized in different degrees. Structural similarities are blurred, and this makes it difficult to compare them and associate them with more abstract but schematic patterns. We suggest that in cases like this, it is more fruitful to focus on horizontal relationships between constructions. These constructions are close synonyms, and we can differentiate between them semantically by looking at the restrictions on the lexical fillers of the open slots. And now Daria will tell you more about prohibitive constructions.
Okay, let us now turn to the overall dataset of prohibitive constructions. First, we grouped 57 Russian prohibitive constructions into 12 families. They are visualized here as boxes. Each family has an index, number of its family members, a brief description, and one representative construction with a gloss. We found that these 12 families encode two kinds of prohibition. So semantically, they form two clusters. Constructions in cluster 1 prohibit a future action, and constructions in cluster 2 encode prohibition of an ongoing activity. That's why we called it continuative prohibition. By the way, these two types of prohibitives are also recognized in the typological literature, for example, in works by Vladimir Khakovsky. All constructions in cluster 1 contain overt markers of negation that are absent from cluster 2. Each cluster contains 6 families, but the first cluster is larger in terms of individual constructions. These two clusters are connected and form a single network. Each cluster has its own local prototype, here indicated with thick boxes. These two families encode most basic prohibitive meanings without any additional semantic nuances. Cluster 1 is centered around its prototypical family, containing negated imperative constructions that express prevention of intended activity, like don't you dare X. Cluster 2 has its own related prototypical family named stop unwanted activity, stop Xing, брось, do something. Semantically, we can outline the prototypical prohibition as follows. First of all, the speaker prompts the interlocutor to not carry out an undesirable activity. The interlocutor is an individual person, or it can be a specific group of people. Then the speaker has more authority or life experience or a higher status in the social hierarchy than the person to whom the prohibition is addressed. Finally, the prohibition is spoken in a strict, commanding, peremptory tone. These basic prototypical semantics can be modified in a variety of ways, and we observe this in other more or less peripheral families. In the diagram, lines with arrows indicate semantic transitions between the families of constructions. First, prohibition can be generalized and presented in terms of a general rule that is officially accepted in the context of a society or an organization. That resi is also generalized. It is a certain category of people, often even not named, so that the constructions can be used as impersonal expressions. Another possibility is attenuation of the standard strict tone, and this yields a family of constructions that sound milder, more like a recommendation or a piece of advice, and they are encoded via predicative expressions rather than imperative forms. The opposite to attenuation is intensification of prohibitive semantics, and in the family number 4, it is achieved through prohibition of the smallest portion of an action. Чтобы никаких NP genitive, no x's. The remaining 2 semantic links in cluster 1 are opposition to resistance and opposition to repetition. In cluster 2, we again see that families to the left represent generalization and attenuation, and this is opposed to more combative, aggressive prohibitions on the right. Cluster 1 is connected to cluster 2 through 3 pairs of families. In each pair, the semantic transition is from the standard prohibition in cluster 1 to continuative prohibition in cluster 2. Lines without arrows in the diagram indicate syntactic or formal similarities between the families of constructions. The 2 prototypical families and 1 more family in purple share the syntactic form of imperative. The families shaded in green here share the form of predicative. And the blue color highlights the use of the same delimitative prefix po. Dotted lines and arrows in the diagram indicate weaker relationships, when the same shared properties are observed in only some constructions in a family. For example, the family prohibition and threat in the bottom right corner is connected to the other 2 brown families through the optional use of the imperative and the prefix po featured in this family. Then thick arrows in the diagram indicate overlap with other networks of constructions. These horizontal links are formed through transitional constructions with multiple motivations. 3 families in cluster 1 share constructions across other networks, namely request, intensity, and warning. And 2 constructions in cluster 2 combine the semantics of prohibition with disapproval and threat, and thus connect this network to other networks accordingly. Thus, we propose this model to represent the internal structure of Russian prohibitive constructions. This is a network that comprises 2 clusters. Each cluster has a radial category structure, which is centered around its local prototypical family of constructions.
Let us conclude. Summing up, we propose to analyze constructions in terms of meaningful groupings at 3 levels: families, clusters, and networks. A family would be the smallest grouping of usually 2 to 9 constructions that are nearly synonymous. We find that some members may also share similar syntactic structure and anchor words, but what's important is that constructions in a family may share not necessarily all properties, but various subsets of these properties. We focus on horizontal relationships between constructions, but can also include inheritance links sometimes. A cluster is a group of families that displays a radial category structure within a network, with a core prototypical family of constructions and related families that are more or less peripheral and encode additional semantic nuances. A network is a structured group of clusters sharing general semantics, such as prohibitive, comparison, assessment, and so on. A network often contains a prototypical cluster and related clusters joined by semantic links or shared families. And why do we need these groupings of constructions? It's because of several reasons. Investigations of relationships between constructions in a family can help to first differentiate between 2 or more nearly synonymous constructions to provide them with thorough descriptions. Secondly, to predict how a family of constructions can expand or evolve. And thirdly, to identify typologically relevant anchor words, which are the fixed elements of constructions. Thank you very much for your attention.